Hello and welcome to this edition of the ABA's Law Student Spotlight, highlighting the section's young lawyer and law student members. My name is Chris Young and I am a YLR for the Leadership Development Special Ops team. With me today is David Templeton, Law Student Liaison for the Antitrust Law section from George Washington University. Welcome, David.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah. So David, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure, yeah, I'm an older law student, so a bit of a non-traditional path. Worked for a few years prior to coming to law school. Also got a master's degree. Um, so now I'm a 3L. Finally, feels like it's been a long journey, especially with this COVID in the middle of law school. But I'm a 3L, soon to be graduating at George Washington. So very much excited to become a real lawyer.
And we're excited to have you in the profession. But why don't you tell us a little bit about how you got interested in the antitrust field, the consumer protection field, and kind of the data privacy field?
Sure. A couple years ago, actually, a bit of a personal story. A couple years ago, um, I noticed that there was some erroneous information on my credit report. And luckily for me, it wasn't that I doing some research, I figured out that it wasn't that my identity had been stolen, which was great news. But, a creditor had accidentally, input the wrong social on someone's credit application. And so that really got me kind of, as a consumer, it really got me interested and deeply concerned, I would say, about, how our information is used, who it's accessible to and for what purposes. And, so really my interest in data privacy is almost, I guess, like a selfish interest, but I am very concerned with how all of our data is being used.
Yeah. So what about data privacy do you think is the most interesting part of kind of what you've learned so far?
I think what's really interesting about data privacy is how relevant it is right now. I mean, I guess California voters just passed Prop 24, right? Last legislative session, I live in Virginia. So last legislative session, Virginia House of Delegates introduced several pieces of legislation, including the Virginia Privacy Act. And then now that we have, a Democratic majority, and I believe, if I understand correctly, I think VP Harris, soon to be VP Harris, spent a lot of time as California AG working on privacy issues. And so I think, it's just it's very exciting and interesting. It feels like it might be a turning point in data privacy.
Mm-hmm. And, in your experience as a law student, have you ever, had any experiences that really kind of helped you grow in your interest in antitrust, consumer protection, or in data privacy?
Yeah, last academic year, I applied for a leadership fellowship with the DC Bar, and they assigned me to the antitrust section, which, as you can imagine, in the DC Bar is a pretty robust section, or has a good membership in the DC Bar, and so I worked with them on putting together some of their programming last academic year, and so then that led me to apply to be the law student liaison for the ABA antitrust section. And so, seeing all, it's amazing. It's really amazing, actually, the amount, just the level of programming that the ABA puts out in the antitrust section. I mean, it's definitely commendable, and it has, there's something kind of for everyone. So being able to, interact with attorneys currently practicing in all these fields has been really interesting.
So in your role as a law student liaison for the antitrust law section, what kind of projects have you worked on, and which ones were your favorites? Which ones really stuck out?
So A lot of what I do is interfacing, but between the section and the antitrust section has started a law student ambassador program, and that predates me joining. But the students can apply, from schools all over the country, and we have around 100 right now, domestic antitrust section law student ambassadors. And so the idea is that, we make sure we give them all the information that we have as far as making sure that they know of every writing competition, every event. They also have the opportunity to be paired with mentors, practicing attorneys in the antitrust field. And so we give them all this information, and then the hope is that most of them, some of them have started antitrust groups, student groups at their law schools. Others, those student groups already existed, and so the idea is for us to get this information out as widely as possible to as many students as possible, so that they can engage with the ABA. And so a lot of what I do is that. But a recent thing, Svetlana Gans, who does a great job sort of leading up the ambassador program, a recent initiative is to start in sort of, I guess, like a pilot phase, an international ambassador program. And so we signed up our first group of international students. I think there are about 10 or 12 from maybe 7 different countries. And so that's probably been the most exciting. I think it's very, I get an email here every once in a while from Peru or Belgium, and that's pretty exciting to get to interact with, motivated law students from all across the world.
It does sound really exciting. But why don't you tell us a little bit more?
Sorry, Chris. Yep. I lost the audio there.
Oh.
Say something?
Testing.
Yeah, I can't hear you. Sorry.
Apologies, we had a bit of a technical hiccup there. But David, why don't you tell us a little bit more about your role as a law student ambassador, kind of what the daily work is like, and what the role really kind of entails on a day-to-day basis.
Sure. Yeah. It's dealing with law student ambassadors applications. It's making sure that we're keeping the list up to date, reaching out to ambassadors who may have graduated to see if they're still part of the program. I think they're still working on how to transition law student ambassadors into like young lawyer representative roles. But it's a lot of making sure that the ambassadors are up to date on everything that's happening with the antitrust section. So it's really more. It's just being a conduit for a good flow of information, I think.
Mm-hmm. And what has been the most rewarding part of your role as a law student ambassador?
Recently I was asked to join, and it has a really long name, but it's part of the Management, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee, which is what the ambassador is assigned to. But then there's a Young Lawyer Outreach Initiative Implementation Group, or something like that. I'm sure it has an acronym at this point. But I was asked to be a part of that, and the goal of the project that they're working on. I mean, there are a lot of things that they're working on, but the overarching goal is to figure out how to drive more engagement into the antitrust section, particularly in the young lawyer, in the younger age group. And so that's exciting. And I think as the ambassador with current regular contact with all of these law student ambassadors, it puts me in a good position to try to amplify that message. So as we're still, the initiative is still ongoing and should continue throughout the academic year, but hoping, that we find some more ways to get law students involved in the antitrust section.
Right. So, in your opinion, why do you think law students should get involved with the ABA and the antitrust section?
I think it's a no-brainer. I mean, I mentioned it earlier, but I mean the amount of programming, and not just fluff, like quality programming where you can actually learn something, where you can interact with attorneys who are doing what you hope to do one day. It's invaluable. I mean, there's so many opportunities when you especially if you look across the whole ABA, but especially even in the antitrust section, it gives you a chance to get your name out there. I think it just shows. I think attorneys. I think any professional generally is willing to offer their time, and it's a pretty low bar, for what they expect from you, and the main thing that they want is for you just to show genuine interest, right? And I mean, if you do that, then people are going to talk to you, people are going to give you advice, and so I think becoming involved in the ABA and the antitrust section is just one of the many ways, to step out there and show that you really are interested and committed to, finding your way.
Mm-hmm. And, what advice would you give to young law students who are interested in antitrust law and how to start? Or I guess another way to phrase it would be, what were the things you wish you knew for any, in the shoes of a young law student trying to get to where you are right now?
Sure. I think I came in a little ahead of the curve, having been in the working world prior to law school. So I learned, some lessons before I got to law school, but the advice is the same. I think no matter what, and it goes back to the last question. I mean, you've just got to put yourself out there, and what's the, I mean, it's obviously hackneyed saying at this point, but it's like, if you don't, what is it? If you, you never know if you don't ask, kind of thing. I think showing genuine interest, asking for opportunities, more often than not, leads to opportunities. So I think it's just put yourself out there every chance you get. If there's a professor that you really like, ask to be their teaching assistant, ask to be their research assistant. I mean, if you're interested in antitrust, apply to be an antitrust ambassador. And just, every step forward that you take is just, it makes that next step, so much easier. So I think it's keep driving forward with intention, and make the most of any opportunity that you get.
Sounds like great advice. And one last question. So, what do you think, in your opinion, is going to be the biggest issue that most interesting issue to you in the antitrust field, consumer protection field, or the data privacy fields?
Sure. I think with hopefully we have renewed purpose for rectifying racial disparities and systemic racism in the U.S., especially after, the last several years. And I think something that's really interesting to me, something I've thought a lot about, and it definitely goes to racial equity, is like college sports and pay to play. I think the amount of money that is generated by that industry, a ton of which, a ton of the participation is by minorities, and the fact that student athletes can't trade in their own likeness is just, I mean, it's just amazing to me. I don't know how here we are in 2021, and that's, we're still wondering how to fix this problem. But I think that, to me, as a sports fan, and as having interest in antitrust, and believing that we need to work towards eliminating racism and its effects in our institutions, I think college sports is a really interesting area.
Right. Well, thank you, David, for the time, and it was great to get to talk to you and get to know you a little bit. And I'm sure our members and prospective law students will enjoy this chat with you.
Thanks so much. Good to talk to you, Chris.
Have a good day. Bye.